Coming up, what does it mean to be a Proud Boy?
We're the villains for the left. We're the heroes of the right.
Jailed for 22 years for trying to destroy democracy.
We won.
But thanks to Donald Trump,
Full part.
Enrique Tarrio is free. Now he and his menacing Proud Boys
They made my family suffer.
are set to settle old scores.
And the people who made them suffer will pay.
Hello and welcome to Extra Minutes, the 60 Minutes podcast. I'm Amelia Adams. This week, we've been spending time with the far-right group, the Proud Boys, in Washington, D.C. after they were all released and pardoned by Donald Trump, one of his key election promises. As part of that story, I sat down with one of the Proud Boys' enemies, one of the law enforcement officers who was brutally beaten by the mob on January 6. Here's my chat with Michael Fanone. No doubt you've encountered plenty of different groups and mobs and movements during your law enforcement career. What is unique, if anything, about the Proud Boys?
I think they're a domestic terrorist organization. They use violent tactics, much like we saw in 1930s and 1940s Germany with the brown shirts in the neo-Nazi or the Nazi movement. They have embraced those tactics and they're utilizing them here in the United States. How dangerous are they? I mean, when put together in numbers, I think they're incredibly dangerous. We saw what unfolded on January 6th in this country. Many Proud Boys participated in that assault on the United States Capitol, which ultimately its motivation was to prevent Congress from certifying the 2020 election results. You've had direct personal experience with Enrique Tarrio. What do you make of him as the leader? This is a movement that seems at least outwardly obsessed with masculinity and being a macho, masculine man. They wear army fatigues and they dress in this, manner that they believe promotes, their strength. This is a guy who, he and his fellow, Proud Boys walk around with body-worn cameras, cell phone cameras, people recording them at all times, trying to bait people like myself into some kind of confrontation so that they can sue us. Or seek some type of, civil action against us. I mean, listen, where I come from, the least masculine thing that you can do to resolve a conflict is to sue someone. Right. He says the Proud Boys are a men's drinking club. They just want to make better men, stronger men. I mean, what's your response to that? That's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. I mean, this is an organization that provokes violent encounters with fellow Americans whom they disagree with politically and videotapes it for the pleasure of themselves and their other members. They are not someone that I would want my children modeling themselves after. They are violent criminals and they should be in prison. Unfortunately, many of them, some whom were convicted of seditious conspiracy, that's essentially being a traitor to this country, and were released by Donald Trump's pardons. Let's talk about January 6. Enrique describes it as this march to the Capitol, mostly peaceful, sprinkling of violence by some people, certainly nothing to do with the Proud Boys. What was the reality of that day? Yeah, I mean, first, for people who may have seen some video from the day or think that they have like a general understanding, I want to put it in perspective, and we'll start at the 30,000 foot level. Please. So why did people go to Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Donald Trump had told the American people, along with many of his sycophants, that the election was stolen. And so they hosted a Stop the Steal rally at the Ellipse, which is a large open space on the south lawn of the White House. This is about 15 blocks away from the United States Capitol, which just so happened on the same day Congress was voting to certify the election results from that same election that Donald Trump lost. During the speech, you may have seen, the clips. There was some fiery rhetoric, things like fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore, I'll march with you to the Capitol. These were things that were said by elected leaders in this country and their supporters. And so many of the people in that crowd took it upon themselves to march 15 blocks from the Ellipse all the way to the United States Capitol. That's 15 blocks of time that they had to think about what they were about to do and why they were doing it. And they arrived at the Capitol. Within a few minutes, they breached the first police perimeter, violently assaulting law enforcement officers and making their way up to the Capitol steps. I myself was on duty that day. I was a DC Metropolitan Police officer. For those that are unfamiliar, there's about 72 law enforcement agencies in Washington, D.C., charged with, protecting federal buildings and a whole host of different responsibilities. Our department is the traditional law enforcement agency in D.C. Yeah. If you dial 911, we're the ones that respond. We heard distress calls coming from the United States Capitol and Capitol Police, and so hundreds of us responded to the Capitol to help defend from these violent rioters.
What was the first thing you saw? What was your first sight of trouble?
So when I arrived, I heard a distress call come out over the radio for the Lower West Terrace Tunnel. When I made my way to the tunnel, what I encountered was a group of about 40 or 50 police officers trying to defend this entranceway into the Capitol from thousands of violent rioters. It was absolute mayhem. It was a very chaotic scene. There was tear gas in the air, some that had been utilized by law enforcement and some that had been utilized by the rioters themselves. There were officers who were injured and still fighting, not just to prevent these attackers from making their way into the Capitol, but fighting for their lives. Had we been overrun at that entrance point, we would have been trampled to death and killed.
Even with all your experience and training, could anything prepare you for that?
No. This was less a law enforcement operation and more a, military style defense of a structure from this onslaught of thousands and thousands of rioters. It's estimated there was, between 10 and 15,000 people at the Capitol on January 6th, fighting against a few hundred police officers.
When you put yourself in that line of fire, defending against the mob, what happened?
So we were able to repel the attackers from the tunnel itself. But at one point, one of the individuals in the crowd, an individual named Albuquerque Head, grabbed me, placed me in a chokehold, and dragged me back off the police line out into the crowd, where I was violently assaulted by numerous individuals, one of whom, Kyle Young, lunged at my firearm, tried to remove my firearm from its holster. Another individual, Daniel Rodriguez, used a taser device on my neck. And during that time, another individual, Thomas Sibick, stripped me of my police badge and my radio. These individuals were all charged criminally. Each and every one of them pled guilty. They were sentenced to varying jail sentences from 5 years in prison to 12 and a half years in prison. And each and every one of them was pardoned by Donald Trump and is now free and out on the streets.
What was the physical extent of your injuries?
I suffered a traumatic brain injury, the seventh of my law enforcement career, as well as a heart attack.
You nearly died.
Correct.
You've had a lot of time to think about this, but you're still angry?
Very angry. I'm outraged, I'm angry, and there's also a strong sense of betrayal. You know, I feel betrayed by the law enforcement agency that I gave 20 years of my life to. I feel betrayed by many of my colleagues, and I also feel betrayed by this country. You know, the lawmakers who would downplay and disregard law enforcement's role in protecting the Capitol on January 6th. And some of them even have demonized us as, you know, the enemy. You know, Donald Trump himself referred to us as violent, vicious thugs. It really is, it's a national disgrace.
Well, yourself and your colleagues who protected the Capitol that day, nearly died defending the Capitol, were national heroes, and now the mob that attacked you are heroes.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the hero word has been thrown around quite a bit, and I think that the assumption is, you know, maybe outside the United States or even outside of, you know, the immediate Washington, D.C. area, there was not a lot of praise heaped on, you know, the officers who fought to defend the Capitol. And, you know, unfortunately, 4 years later, it's barely even mentioned anymore in a positive way. The real struggle, though, is the ongoing struggle is watching so many Americans turn their backs on those of us that served that day, and the level of indifference that this country has for, you know, people who have made these extreme sacrifices for democracy and ultimately for all of them. I mean, listen, I'm motivated by my family. I'm motivated by my 4 daughters, my mother and my father, my sister, my ex-wife. Everyone else can pretty much go to hell. But ultimately, I know that the sacrifices I'm making benefit a lot of Americans. I just wish they would wake the fuck up and, you know, get on board the democracy train.
Enrique Tarrio tells us he's planning to run for office. He'd quite like to represent Americans on Capitol Hill one day.
Enrique Tarrio was convicted of seditious conspiracy against the United States of America. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Donald Trump may have pardoned him, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't guilty of those actions. I mean, should he be in office? Hell no. Would it be possible for Enrique Tarrio to find some backwards part of America where people would fucking elect him? Absolutely. Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene.
It's like an upside down reality, isn't it? I mean, you have Jan 6 supporters, activists, now back in Congress.
Yes. I mean, it most certainly is. And I think it's going to be short-lived.
How bizarre is it? I mean, you're used to it. You're kind of like, this is just the way America is now. But to us, this is just like extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I've never had the opportunity to look at things from the outside in. You know, I'm an American, and I'm experiencing this, you know, as an American. But you know, even to me, it's disgraceful. You know, we were talking earlier about, you know, my thoughts on American exceptionalism and the fact that, you know, prior to January 6th, I was very much someone who bought into the idea that this country was exceptional and that its people were exceptional.
You would call yourself a patriot?
Yes. Well, I still think I'm a patriot. That being said, I don't believe that America itself is an exceptional country. I think there are some of us who are exceptional, who strive to achieve, a very idealistic version of democracy in which, all people are treated equally, and that the rule of law is applied equally to all of us. We've come a long way away from those ideals in this current administration. I would even claim that we're at the polar opposite of equal application of the law. We have a president who openly says that he is a president only for those that support him and support his policies and his ideology. That's a very scary thing when you are someone who lives in this country who opposes his ideology.
Do you fear for your life now?
I wouldn't use the word fear, but I have accepted that violent encounters are a very real possibility for me and for members of my family.
You mentioned the rule of law. Enrique Tarrio is seeking retribution for his sentence, his prosecution. He said the other day he intends to...
Let me guess, sue people.
Use the rule of law, were his words.
Yeah.
What's your response to that?
It doesn't matter what I think about it. It matters what the American people think about this. Is this the kind of country that you want to live in, that somebody like Enrique Tarrio is going to, seek retribution because he himself engaged in seditious conspiracy, but because Donald Trump saw him as an ally, which in and of itself should speak volumes about who Donald Trump is and what this administration stands for, that they would see members convicted of seditious conspiracy of these violent extremist groups as allies. The American people ultimately are going to have to make the decision as to whether they find this acceptable or not.
What's it like for you when Enrique Tarrio and his Proud Boys turn up at events where you're speaking, harass you, intimidate you, yell abuse at you?
It can be exhausting.
It must be incredibly confronting.
Yeah, no, you understand what the intention is. It's to bait you into some type of violent confrontation or, hope that I utter some kind of threats that they can in turn use, again, to file a lawsuit. That being said, I'm tired of turning the other cheek, so to speak. And I am not simply going to, run away from these types of encounters. I recognize them for what they are. That being said, I am, I'm steadfast in my commitment to speaking the truth about my experiences on January 6th and, the impact that that's had on my life and my family members' lives. I think what was most troubling the other day when he showed up at the summit that I was speaking at was that my family was there. My daughters were there. My mother was there. My father was there. My sister was there. And these are all individuals who have been targeted time and time again by these violent extremists with everything from swatting incidents to harassing phone calls, threatening emails, text messages. It takes things, I think, to a different level when somebody fucks with your family.
So that's what really rattled you?
It pissed me off. Yeah.
Why do you think it's important for people to know about these groups, about the Proud Boys?
I mean, it's important for them to know about these groups because it's important for them to understand what it is that they're doing with the political discourse in this country. It's ultimately every American's responsibility to reject it and reject it each and every time they encounter it. You know, evil persists when good men don't do shit. And we've got a lot of that right now going on in this country. You know, it's like COVID. It's infecting everyone. You know, this is scary stuff. And, you know, Americans need to be scared, but they can't let that fear paralyze them. They need to turn that into action.
Could a situation like January 6 happen again?
Oh, I mean, to that scale, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not in law enforcement anymore. But I mean, if you have the encounters that I have with average Americans on a daily basis, you see the anger and you see the hatred and vitriol that has infected, you know, our political discourse here. And so, you know, violence is an inevitable reality. It's not about could it happen or would it happen. It will happen.